Hi everyone, I'm Noel from Creation Effects, and this is the video tutorial for creating a 3D flipbook in After Effects using the 3D flipbook template from creationeffects.com. Before we start, let me tell you what the effect does. It's designed so that you can just drop in your video footage and then it'll be shown as a series of still images on the pages of this 3D flipbook. And the page turns are all automatic. You just use the controls to set the speed, and you can set whether you want intervals between page turns, and then the flipbook will do the rest. There are a lot of customization options and a lot to go over, so I'm going to try to move through this pretty fast. And I'll be covering the essential stuff first, which is doing these 3 steps, and then I'll go through all of the customization controls, and I'll end with some troubleshooting info. So when you download the zip file, unzip it and you'll see an After Effects project file inside. And open that up and you'll see an instructions comp, so you can read through that if you want. These instructions comps are found throughout the template and they can provide some quick answers if you ever get stuck. I'm going to close that and go to my project panel. You'll see the 3 steps here for setting up your animation. We're going to do those, but first I want to make sure my Effect Controls panel is available. If it isn't, go to the Window menu and select Effect Controls. And if you see animation presets like this, you'll want to hide those because they take up valuable space and you don't need them. So go to the little arrow icon at the top and uncheck Show Animation Presets. Back in my project panel, I'll open the Step 1 folder. The step's easy, it's just dropping in your footage. So go to Import and select the video file to bring your footage into the project. And then you'll drag it into one of these 2 comps. You have turned pages and you have unturned pages. So these refer to the 2 sides of the book, and you have to decide how you want your book positioned and on which side your footage should be displayed. So think about flipping through a flipbook and you've got 2 sides or 2 stacks of pages. And since the pages here turn from left to right, there's the unturned stack on the left and there's the turned stack on the right. If you're not very picky about what you want, I recommend you just go through the 4 presets here in the Step 3 folder. Just open these comps and look at them and choose a preset. And if the camera is pointed at the turned pages side of the book, then that's the side you should go with. Most of these presets have the camera pointed at the turned pages, so I'll just drag my footage into the Your Footage Turned Pages comp here in the Step 1 folder, and I'll leave the Unturned Pages comp empty. Also, if you want, you can customize the paper texture of your book in this step. Open the comp that says Your Paper, and you'll see that we have a plain white paper texture in there. But if you open the Images folder here, you'll see a lot more options. So you can just drag any of these files into the Your Paper comp to change the look of the pages in your flipbook. I'll close Step 1 and open up the Step 2 folder. Step 2 is customizing how your footage will look on your pages. I put my footage in the Turned Pages side of the book, so I'll open the Turned Pages comp in the Step 2 folder. You'll see that your footage has a sort of comic book effect with a line border around the edges. And of course, you don't have to keep this effect if you don't want. You can hide all of these top layers and you can turn off the cartoon effect on this layer here. Or if you want to customize the effect, all of these layers have some notes in the layer markers which tell you how to customize the effects. All you really need to know is however your footage looks in this comp is how it will look in the final flipbook. At the very least, you'll probably want to use a blending mode with your footage layer here so that it blends with the paper texture down here. Okay, let's go to this final step, which is customizing your preset. There are 4 presets and they can be exported as they are if you're in a hurry, or you can use them as a starting point for your animation and just customize them to your heart's desire. Each preset works a little differently and they might have different layers and size, so just go with the one that is closest to what you want. I'm going to open this Flipbook Tracking Shot preset here so we can see the basic components. Each preset has an instructions layer which tells you what's different about that preset. You can hide that. And we got our camera and light layers at the top. And then these orange layers are the front and back sides of the page that turns. And there's really only one page of the book that turns and it's on a loop. So that's these layers here. And then we have these yellow layers which make up the stack of unturned pages, one layer for each page. And you can make your stack thicker with more pages by going to this last yellow layer that says duplicate this layer to create more pages, and just duplicate that layer as many times as you want. And under those are these green layers, which are the pages in the turned stack. And again, you can add pages to the stack by duplicating that bottom layer. And below those is this toss stack page 1 layer, which is hidden in this comp because it's not needed in this preset. But if you were to use the page toss controls to have the pages fall into a pile separate from the book, you would need to unhide this layer and duplicate it a bunch of times so that there's a copy of it for each page that gets tossed. And if you open the Flipbook card toss preset, you'll notice there's a bunch of these layers and none of these turned stack or unturned stack layers. And finally, at the very bottom, you have the background images. There's a few different options for your tabletop, and I show you how to swap those images later in the tutorial. Okay, the most important thing to note in each preset is this control layer back up at the top here. Select it, and then in the Effect Controls panel here, you'll see dozens of slider controls which allow you to customize the book. You don't need to mess with these if you don't want to. I think most of you will just want to tweak the first couple controls and then leave the other settings and the camera movements at their default, and that'll get your movie exported quickly. But this is an advanced effect, and you have lots of options in customizing how the book looks and works using all of these slider controls. So I'm going to quickly go through all of these controls, but also you can look up the description of each control in the instructions comp here. Just unhide these layers to see some helpful info about the controls. The first two, as I mentioned, are the most important. You can see the controls are categorized into sections. So in your page turn controls section here, the first control is page turn duration. So this is the speed of the page turns, or the number of frames that each page turn will last. And you also have this control, frames between turns. With this you can set intervals between the page turns. So play with those and you'll get a variety of looks. If you want it to look like a normal flip book, just keep the page turn duration low and leave the intervals at 0 to keep those pages turning quickly. Page angle at start of turn and page angle at end of turn. These will let you set the angle of either stack. So you can open or close the unturned stack further, like this, for example. Page turn on. This one could be useful to you and it requires a little bit of explanation. It's a checkbox control, so you just leave it checked and the pages will turn continually on a loop. However, if you want the pages to stop turning at a set time or start turning after a set time, like at the 5-second mark, for example, have this off for 5 seconds and then keyframe it to turn on after 5 seconds. And what actually that does is when it's off, it's hiding the pages that are turning. So it doesn't actually stop the pages from turning, it just hides those layers. So be sure to find a frame when a page turn is just finished, and then keyframe this control to turn on at that exact frame. Otherwise the page will appear in the middle of its turn. And you also want to go to your original comp that has your footage in it and slide your footage over so that it starts at that 5-second mark. Or you can use the time remapping effect to make the first frame pause for 5 seconds and then play normally after that. And what that'll do is have that paused frame show up on the page of the book before your page turns start. Alright, posterize time on. Leave that checked and your footage will be converted into a series of still images, one for each page. Uncheck it and your footage will play at a normal 30 frames per second, even as the pages turn. Leave first page blank. This will do just what it says. It's an easy way to take your footage off the first page of the book. And so those are the page turn controls. Let's look at these perspective controls. These control the amount of bend a page has while it's turning. After Effects can't really bend or curve layers in 3D, so we have to create the illusion of bending pages by warping the edges of the page and curving them inward or outward. The default settings are fine usually, but if you want to change the position of the camera and change the angle at which you see the book, you may notice the curving doesn't look right. So You'll need to adjust these curves manually with these controls. You can see there are separate controls for the left edge of the page and for the right edge of the page. And there are also separate controls for the beginning, middle, and end. Like we have this left edge curve start, left edge curve middle, left edge curve end. Those control the amount of curving for each stage of the page turn. So, for example, you may want the page to bend a little more while it's turning, which would be the middle stage. And so to preview a change like that on the middle phase of a page turn, just go to the frame in your timeline where a page is in the middle of its turn, and then play with a control. And you can also change the bend of the unturned and turned stacks of pages as well, but those controls are further down. All right, the corner peel controls here edit the CC page turn effect on the page that's turning. It's a 2D effect on a 3D layer, so it's limited in what it can do. You can't turn the controls up too much or it's just going to look bad, but a little bit of corner peel makes each page look a little different as it falls or turns, and it just makes it look more natural. To preview your changes, you should go to the middle of a page turn. The page has no corner peel at the beginning of a page turn, and as soon as it starts to turn, the corner peel will increase and it will reach the amount that you set here when it's halfway through its turn. And then the corner peel will decrease again as the turn comes to an end. So to preview it, go to about halfway through a turn, and you may want to turn off motion blur here so you can see the page better, and then just play with the controls a little bit. You can increase or decrease the amount, and you can change the direction so it's more in the left corner or the right corner. And then you have these variation controls which add some randomness so that these other values will fluctuate a little bit with each page turn. Let's look at the page toss controls real quick. Only turn on page toss if you want your pages to be separated from the book as they turn, which can make it look like they're being tossed into a stack on the table. And when it's on, you can adjust the distance that they're tossed here, and you can adjust how high off the book they get tossed. And sometimes you'll have to turn this up to avoid pages intersecting with each other. And then there's a few variation controls again: horizontal scatter variation, vertical scatter variation, and rotation variation. And these will let you randomize how the pages land so they're not all falling into a neat little stack. Page stack spacing, it's set to 4 by default, which means that each page will land 4 pixels above the page under it on the y-axis. You probably don't want to go much lower than that, but when you have a lot of pages stacking up, it poses a problem because they'll get closer and closer to your camera. So you may have to animate your camera to move back if you have a lawn animation, or maybe turn off depth of field on the camera to make sure that everything stays in focus. Light and shadow controls, these are pretty self-explanatory. Each preset is lit up with 3 lights here. So those controls will edit some attributes of the lights, or you can always just edit the light layers directly. Position and camera. The only real control here for the camera is the zoom amount, and the rest of these controls affect the position of the flipbook. So you can move or rotate the entire book in 3 dimensions, and these actually affect the position and rotation of the control layer here. But all the layers that make up the book are parented to the control layer, so whatever the control layer does, the book does. It's best to enter these values in directly with these controls rather than clicking and dragging these, because it might cause some errors, and I address that in the troubleshooting section at the end of the video. Next, we have 2 sections of controls: unturned page stack and turned page stack. So as you probably guessed, you can customize how these stacks of pages look. I'm not going to go over these individually because it'll be pretty obvious when you play with the controls what they do. And lastly, these expression references at the end here, they work with the expressions and you can just ignore them. And that, my friends, covers the control layer. Let me show you one more customization. You can swap out the background image in any of these presets if you want. Just go down near the bottom of your layers and select the layer that's serving as your tabletop. And then open the images folder and open tabletop image options. And then select any new image that you want to use as your tabletop. And then with the old layer selected down here and the new layer selected here, hold down the Alt or Option key and then drag this file and drop it onto the old layer like this. Okay, so we're almost done here, but I want to go over a few troubleshooting issues. First, if you're using the controls and you click and drag the value and you're dragging and all of a sudden, whoa, message and more error messages. And maybe there will be like 40 of these errors and it's stupid, but you're going to have to just keep clicking OK until they stop popping up. And then you'll want to undo your last action so that the control value goes back to where it was. And then finally, you need to turn on all of the expressions that just gave you error messages. So select all the layers in the timeline, right-click one of them, and choose Reveal Expression Errors. And all of the broken expressions will appear with a yellow exclamation mark icon next to them. And to turn them back on, you just click this little equal sign icon next to them. And do that for all of them. So these errors happen with some controls because of some imperfection in my expressions and because some value you passed over caused an error. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use a high value, but you'll have to enter it in directly rather than dragging the value. So and that tip I just showed you is actually the first thing you should try whenever something in the template doesn't seem to be working the way that you would expect. Check for broken expressions and just turn them back on. Another tip I want to share, if you're using the controls to make adjustments to the position of pages, or if you just want to better understand how the book is working, try changing the comp view to right or sometimes to front. And this will give you a clear view of the pages and what's happening to them as they turn. Now you might see ugly stripes or a pattern on your pages that shouldn't be there. And this is actually normal when you're in half resolution or less. It probably won't render out like that, and you can change the resolution to full to see what it will look like in your final render. But if you still see stripes, then change the view to right and see if any of the pages are intersecting or almost touching each other, and then use the controls on the control layer to space them out a little bit. If you're seeing some other type of glitch on 3D layers, like sections disappearing and reappearing as your camera moves, you may have to turn off depth of field in the camera layer to get rid of it. So just double click the camera layer and uncheck depth of field. One final note, if your footage is not completely paused on a page, like a frame changes right after a page turn, just try a different page turn duration value. It seems like certain values don't work quite as well as others, so just change the value slightly or change this value slightly, and hopefully that'll solve the problem. All right, that is everything I want to share with you people. I release you to go create your animation, and you can like Creation Effects on Facebook to stay up to date when new effects come out. And you can visit creationeffects.com to see a bunch of really cool After Effects templates like the 3D Storybook and VHS effects and glitch effects. And my favorite, the Art Effects template, which lets you convert your footage to art in any medium that you want. All right, thanks for watching and good luck with your project.